Good afternoon to everyone. Um, so today's topic, as Kamisha would have said, is health and safety practices for essential services. And basically, everyone should have an idea of what and who the essential services are in Barbados. But just in case you don't know, it refers basically to those services which are essential to the functioning and operations of the country, and it would include sectors such as healthcare, like the hospitals, utility services, telecommunications, transportation, gas stations, supermarkets, etc. So, in this context, essential services are the persons that we're going to be targeting. So, in light of the confirmed COVID-19 cases in Barbados, the health and safety practices have really been brought to the forelight, and we have recognized that it's key and crucial to fight the spread of the COVID-19 crisis to practice good and proper hygiene within our homes and within our workplaces. So that's going to be my primary focus, so that everyone would have a an idea or a better idea of the types of hygiene measures that they should be utilizing within their homes, within the businesses, in order to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And these measures, they are practical and they are the recommended measures that have been outlined within the COVID-19 guidance for business places. Um, so I'm going to start first, as Kamisha said, with outlining regarding the employee health screening. When you hear employee health screening, basically it just speaks to a range of checks and tests um, that you would perform in a person in order to identify the risks to health. So with the COVID-19, we know the main symptoms, the cough, the fever. Um, and the temperature screening is very, very important here. Now, the first thing I must say, remember we always have to follow the protocols that are set out by our government and and our health authorities here. And if you have those symptoms, fever, cough, or difficulty breathing, the first response is to contact the hotline 536-4500. So usually I always tell persons, for all emergency numbers, fire, police, ambulance, have those handy where you can see them, remember them. I would recommend the same thing for this. Just in case you need it, you have it at hand's reach. So that's the first thing as it relates then to persons in the island. As it relates now to businesses, um, the health screening now is dependent on the business that you're in, and obviously the organizational structure and the context of the organization. Because as we're seeing now worldwide, some places are making it mandatory for persons to have these temperature checks as a first response type of thing. If you're showing a fever, then you're recommended for further screening for the COVID virus. You recommend then to leave your workplace, go into isolation, or whatever the case may be. So organizations in Barbados, they need to be mindful of this. And if they are putting such policies in place, then obviously they would have to do their checks to make sure that they're implementing it in the correct way. Of course, maintaining client confidentiality and privacy, those type of things, and to ensure that it's also in accordance with the laws of the land. Um, my opinion on it, I see nothing wrong with it. I know that we would have been doing some checks at our local airport, um, and it is a good idea for persons and businesses to to do it. Um, Obviously, there are some factors that you must bear in mind. It's just a starting ground. It might not. Um, some persons might show a high fever and they might not be carrying the COVID-19 virus. So You just have to be mindful of how you use it and consider the other factors as well. Some persons might be on paracetamol, pain and fever relieving medication. So obviously it might mask the fever. So in addition to that, you should also be doing other checks and other tests in order to definitively confirm that the fever is as a result of the COVID-19. We've also internationally, you're seeing in China, they have introduced a smart helmet, which is able to scan person's body temperature, from meters away, which I thought was very cool and innovative. But we don't have those here in Barbados, unfortunately. But just regular thermometer, and you will be able to check the person's body temperatures. Um, so that's my take basically on the temperature screening. It is a good starting point, but it cannot be the only means. In terms of PPE now, excuse me, there's a lot of debate about PPE and the use of PPE, best PPE to use, who should use the PPE, and what I can say about the PPE, which is the personal protective equipment, you must be able to um, use it correctly and effectively. If not, you end up doing the opposite. You can end up infecting yourself if indeed the virus is on perhaps the gloves or the face mask. So when we say PPE, you generally speak to eye protection, face protection, hands, feet, and we're seeing predominantly with the COVID, the use of gloves and the use of face masks. Now, the World Health Organization, their website, have some really good videos on the use of face masks and really good guidance on who should use face masks, etc. And also in the we're given guidelines on specific cases of when you're to wear the face mask if you're experiencing symptoms of fever, cough, or the difficulty in breathing, or if you're taking care of someone who is suspected to have the COVID-19 virus. Ordinarily, if you're in good health, you're not supposed to wear um, the face mask because basically there is no evidence to support that it can protect you from contracting the COVID-19 virus. Again, a lot of discussion in terms of persons coughing and sneezing, and even being able to limit the projection of the droplets into the air, etc. But it's best to follow the guidance as provided on the World Health Organization website. And also to note in terms of being able to use these masks properly and then being able to dispose of these masks correctly is also very, very important to be able to prevent you from being contaminated, infected with the virus. In terms of gloves, again, you're seeing a lot of persons wearing their gloves. Nothing is wrong with that, but all over you're hearing persons cautioning persons about using gloves and then touching the face and the eyes, etc. So again, you should be employing the correct measures for putting on the gloves as well as removing the gloves to avoid contamination from the gloves onto your hands. And there are many, many, if you go online as well, you can find the steps which will show the correct procedures for putting on and taking off the gloves. If you're using the gloves, I also recommend that you change them on a regular basis and don't keep them on regularly. The COVID-19, it stays on gloves the same way it would stay on paper or any other surface. So again, it's something that you have to be very careful with because it's there for your protection, but the misuse of it can also cause you to be infected with the COVID-19 virus if it is on the gloves. And always be sure to discard the gloves in suitable containers as recommended. In terms now of loss prevention considerations, when we speak loss prevention, it basically speaks preventing the loss of life, um, loss of health, and loss of property, which would arise from an incident or an accident in in general. In light of the COVID-19, we are speaking specifically to the measures that you can put in place um, as it regards to the COVID-19. So basically, it will be about implementing, enforcing, and monitoring these measures that will be able to safeguard the lives and your properties or businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. So at the beginning, I would have mentioned predominantly about the hygiene measures. So employing these hygiene measures within your businesses is essential to preventing loss of life because as you will recognize, we have no loss of life here in Barbados. I hope it doesn't happen. But overseas, a lot of persons have died from um, contracting the COVID-19 virus. So, as with any business, your operations, your exposures, your controls, these are all things that you must factor in when it comes to loss prevention. I always tell persons your workers are your most valuable assets, and their health and safety must be the number one priority. And this is where your health and safety practices and your hygiene practices must take priority in the workplace in terms of providing adequate soap, sanitizer, paper towels, those type of things that you need in order to keep your hygiene at optimal levels. Um, if I know right now there is a shortage of the sanitizer island-wide, there's also guidance on how you can actually prepare your own sanitizer. I can make a recommendation here as well. This is outlined in COVID-19 guidance for business places, where you can use ethanol, hydrogen peroxide, and glycerine in certain combination in order to be effective, which will give you at least 70% alcohol protection. So you're recommended between 70 to 75% alcohol-based sanitizers in order to be effective in fighting the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Specifically, if you want volumes, if you want to be able to make your own sanitizers, if you're using 96% ethanol, you can use approximately 833 mils of ethanol, hydrogen peroxide, approximately 42 mils, and glycerine, approximately 14 mils. And that would give you a safe and effective sanitizer. It's very easy to prepare, and it is very important in fighting the virus. In terms of these sanitizers within the workplaces, you can have those designated points upon entering rooms, upon leaving rooms, especially depending on the type of work environment, especially, hospitals, etc. Those types of environments are really, really, really crucial, and the hand sanitization is very, very crucial in those areas. You can post little signage, remind persons, wash your hands regularly, sanitize your hands regularly, sanitize your workstations, the equipment, etc. that you use on a daily basis, and just continue to practice good hygiene overall, good personal hygiene. Proper hand washing is also very, very important. Sanitizing of hands is not um, above hand washing. We recommend washing your hands with soap and water for that 20 seconds. Wash the palms of your hand between the webs of your fingers. If you have nails under your nails, for that 20 seconds. Rinse well, and then you can even sanitize after. If you don't have soap and water, you can sanitize your hands with the alcohol-based sanitizers until you can wash your hands. So again, there's guidance in the COVID-19 guidance for business places, where it speaks to the personal hygiene measures, where you wash your hands thoroughly for 20 seconds. You use the hand sanitizer. Your hands don't even have to look dirty. You know, you can't tell whether germs are on your hands from just looking. So this is why it's very important. Even if you think your hands clean, still sanitize them. In terms of coughing and sneezing, you know, cover your mouth, cover your nose with tissue, discard the tissue in the waste bins, etc. And wash your hands after, because if it get on the tissue, there's a possibility that it has gotten on your hand as well. Avoid close contact with persons who are unwell. And now we're doing the social distancing, 4 to 6 feet away. We're practical. In terms of your workstations, clean and disinfect your objects and surfaces. Um, don't touch your eyes, your nose, and your mouth, etc. In terms of the general measures, it speaks to preventing the spread of the COVID-19 by being able to identify a room where you can use for isolation purposes. Where possible, you have a plan where you can work from home. If you recognize that persons might be ill with respiratory symptoms, you know, encourage those workers to stay at home. If they can work from at home, fine. And as an employer, you have to be able to provide the tissue, the bins, the soap, sanitizers, everything that persons would need in order to maintain good personal hygiene within the workplace. And again, sanitation of your workstations and the workplace in general is very, very important here as well. In terms of responsibilities, it to me it's within your own personal responsibility if you know that you're not feeling well, especially if you're exhibiting the signs and symptoms of the COVID-19. You know, notify your employer, your supervisor, your manager, whoever, so that they can make an informed decision as to what to do. Or even if you know someone within the workplace who might be ill, you know, report that to management. If you have your PPE, use your PPE within the workplace. Any unsafe conditions, etc. Again, report within your workplace. And these are all your responsibilities as it relates to loss prevention and safety within the workplace. If it comes to that, we may have to do an island-wide shutdown, you know, make sure that your businesses and your properties are secured, because, you know, you tend to get escalation of crime, etc. And at the end of it all, you want a business that you want to be able to go back to. And you have to make sure that your workplace is safe before, during, and even after the pandemic. So basically, the hygiene is critical to maintaining your health and your safety above everything else. So I just want to encourage everyone to utilize those hygiene practices, make it a habit, you know, proper hand washing and sanitization on a regular and a daily basis. That's it for me, Kanisha, Jessica.
Yes, right. So as I was saying, this situation has given rise to a lot of new legal questions because what we're now forced to do is to start at the beginning, essentially look at first principles and try to extrapolate from those what people's responsibilities are, how far they go, what choices they can legitimately and reasonably make without being able to say definitively what a court may or may not, or what a tribunal may or may not decide was reasonable in the circumstances. When we're looking at safety and health at work, the premise, the basis for that, of course, is ensuring that the space where the employee has to work is safe for them to work within it. And we are guided primarily by the Safety and Health at Work Act, which imposes responsibilities on employers, but also on employees. And I think sometimes we don't think about the extent to which an employee has a responsibility for their own safety as well, expressly stated in the legislation. So the responsibility of an employer is to ensure that there is a safe working environment. It is expressed in general terms, and then there are some specific sections of the legislation that apply to particular types of environments which are known to be more dangerous, and the types of responsibilities that someone might have. Now, it is noteworthy that the legislation itself does not make any provision in relation to protecting employees from illnesses. And as such, a pandemic is not anything contemplated directly or expressly in the legislation. So a lot of the steps that employers are now taking are based on what might be considered to be reasonable in the circumstances. And that is all that is required of them, to take steps which are reasonable and reasonably practicable to ensure that their employees are not exposed to an unsafe environment. And in this case, of course, the primary concern that people are thinking about is exposure to illness. So that's the first thing that I'm going to address. Every work environment is different, and no broad brush statement can be given to every type of employer about the types of things that may be necessary to protect their employee. You may have a situation where you have employees that engage with individuals on a regular basis taking cash. And you may want to ask yourself, how do I deal with cash? Do I have the employee take the cash and sanitize their hands every time they take cash? Do I have the employee sanitize their hands or wash their hands every 20 minutes just to make sure that they're not putting themselves at risk? Do I have them sanitize the cash? All of these are things which you ask because somebody has to write up the deposit book or the deposit slip, right? Those are all legitimate questions that we have to ask ourselves. And the answer is whatever is reasonably practicable for your working environment is what you need to do.
Yes.
Right? That is what you need to do. Nobody can tell you, yes, do this, or no, don't do that. If you can take a step that will make it easier and will make it safer for your employee, take that step. And it has to be remembered, as I said, everything has to be related to the particular business. So a lot of people now are, they're having hand sanitizer at work. They're making sure, in most places now, that you actually have soap that you can use to wash your hands, because we know there's some public places where you go and there's never any soap. And now I find everywhere I go there's soap because people are concerned with that. So those are the very basic baseline things that you need to think about. But one of the things which I think people aren't necessarily looking at is the policy that has to go behind it. As an employer, the obligation to create a safe working environment also extends to creating a policy as to how employees are to work, the things they are to do to ensure their safety and the safety of others. So there has to be a written, it doesn't have to be a written policy, but there has to be a statement from you in very clear terms about what you expect your employees to do, especially at a time with the heightened concerns about illness. The need for there to be a written policy comes into play once you have more than 10 employees. But ultimately, you have to sit and think through, what are the things that I can do that are within my power to do, which can make my employees safer? And as we discussed this morning, you will be able to get people to respond and reply and to engage in the things you want them to do once you actually engage with them, discuss with them, show them the importance, because then you'll be able to get more compliance. The law, which as I said, I don't think a lot of people know it, but the law requires employees to take reasonable steps for their own safety, and it imposes an obligation on them to cooperate with an employer in the implementation of any policies that the employer must implement for the safety of them and other employees. So it is not simple, it's not so simple to say, well, the employer feels like doing that, but I'm not going to agree. Once it is a health and safety consideration, and it is a reasonable step that the employer is taking in order to secure everyone's safety, there is a responsibility on the employee to cooperate as far as reasonably practicable. But as I said, I find you will not be able to be successful in getting the buy-in of your employees, that ensuring that the office continues to function without fear and so on, unless you engage with the employee. So one of the things I want people to appreciate is that their legal rights and obligations, and then their practical applications of those. And that's why you have to always consider the fact that you're dealing with individuals and they have their own fears, they have their own concerns whenever you're trying to implement things which amount to a change. Some other considerations though are in terms of spacing. So you have, as I said, every environment is different. You may have employees that must work at the workplace. They cannot work from home. So you may have to reorganize your workspace in order to ensure that there's sufficient distance between employees to ensure that there is that proper social distancing approach. You can implement policies yourself in a more detailed way in terms of social distancing. You can indicate, well, at no point would you want employees to be closer than X or Y distance from each other. As I said, it's best not to impose it in a way that suggests that if I see you 2 feet away from your coworker, I want to look at imposing disciplinary action. You don't necessarily want to approach it that way, but approach it from the perspective of, I want you to be safe and I want your coworker to be safe as well. So it's now our policy that people are not to be any closer than 3 feet apart, you know, once they can help from doing that. And you set up the systems and the practical structures within the business to facilitate that. You may have changes in how you do business. So various restaurants are now changing how they do things in terms of serving food. So practically speaking, you now have to look at creating policies and procedures for how food is going to be delivered in a way that allows your customers to purchase from you, but also allows your staff to safely serve the customers. And I can come up with a few, but that is just based on my experience as a customer and not my experience as the owner of a restaurant. You, as the owner of the restaurant, need to think of how you can best organize the working environment and the delivery of your services to serve the public, yes, but also to ensure that your employees are safe. And I encourage, once again, there to be engagement with your employees on that, because they also know how they best do business. They also know how they best deliver the services on behalf of you and the business. And they are the ones who might be able to come up with suggestions. Once you have them being engaged in the process, I think you will find that things will flow a lot easier and it will seem a lot less like an obligation on you and more like a team effort to be able to move things forward in a way that makes sense for everyone. You might also want to consider vulnerable staff. As we know, there's specific individuals who are considered vulnerable as it relates to COVID-19. And yes, you have a broad obligation, but that obligation might extend to considering, insofar as you are aware, the employees that you have that may have certain health challenges and may themselves, for example, you may have an employee that's over a certain age. You may want to engage that employee on how best you can organize their working environment to make sure that they are safe, whether that means moving to remote work for them or some other type of action that can be taken to allow them to continue to work, but which is in their interest in terms of reducing, for example, their interaction with other people, and customers and even other members of staff. Right, so those are some of the main things that I would encourage people to think about in terms of the safety and health at work. Just remember at all times that it's a two-way street. Employer and employee, we all have obligations. And if you make it clear to everyone that you just want everyone to comply with their obligations for their own health and safety, then I think for the most part, you will comply with your responsibilities. As I said, the main thing you need to have is some type of policy. And when I say a policy, I mean a thought out and considered approach to ensure the health and safety of your employees in the face of this pandemic, and to do so at work. I do know that some people are concerned about staff commuting to and from work, but your responsibility is to ensure the workplace is safe. Your responsibility does not extend to how your employees get to the workplace. So some employers may choose to try to find ways to assist their employees in coming to work other than through the public service transportation and so on, the minibuses, ZRs, transport board buses. Some people may do that in an effort to limit the exposure that their staff has. But in choosing to do that, it must be remembered that there might be additional liability which may fall on you if something happens to your employee while they are using the means you have recommended or you have employed to get them to work. So that is something to consider as well. Ultimately, your employees have a responsibility to get to the workplace, and hopefully they will find a way to get there which does not expose them. You can provide them with learning materials and so on in terms of how they can protect themselves in trying to, well, in their ordinary life, and try to encourage them to take certain steps to not protect themselves, the people around them, and to be conscious about how they are feeling in terms of their health. Because if they're not feeling well, then it's in the interest of everyone that they not come to work. So those are just a few of the legal considerations that I would invite an employer to consider at this time.
I have an employee that insists on sitting at her co-worker's desk to eat lunch. Can BEC provide a draft of the social distancing policy, or at least if I submit one, can it be reviewed? I think that question possibly would be more posted to Sheena, or if you're in, you may be able to respond to her. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure how to unmute myself, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. We do offer free email and telephone support to our members. So any one of our members, if you have a policy that you want us to review, feel free to email it to us. If you don't have our generic email address, you can use helpdesk@barbadosemployers.com. That is the email address that we are using currently, that any of the officers can pick up and respond to your query. So you can email that to us for review. We have another question. Should management police employees who congregate outside the social distancing protocol?
That depends on the definition of police. I mean, it's important for an employer to clearly communicate what the social distancing protocol is, and to explain to the employee in very clear terms what that requires for them. In terms of an employer walking around just to make sure that people are less than 3 feet, more than 3 feet apart, I don't know that there's a responsibility on an employer to do that. It just may be prudent to have an eye out, and for people who you see who are not really complying with it, engage them, have a conversation with them, make it clear to them what is required. And it has to be understood that failing to abide by this policy is a breach of the employee's contract, right? Once you have determined that, once you've actually set a social distancing or health and safety policy for the purposes of COVID-19, and it's a reasonable policy, and employees continue to float that, that's a breach of their employment contract, and they can be subject to disciplinary action for not complying. So I think it's probably a 3-step process. Create the policy, make the policy known to the employees, and if employees do not comply, in the first instance, have a discussion with them. And I guess step 4 ultimately would be, if they're not complying, then you start the disciplinary process by way of an oral warning, because the first discussion I would suggest is just a discussion. The second one could be an oral warning, then a written warning. You can escalate as necessary.
We have another question. In terms of health and safety, can I ask a staff to leave the compound if they are coughing constantly?
Yes, that is a part of the policy. In other words, once you have identified the things you want to do to keep your employees safe, then that's something that any reasonable employer would do to keep everyone safe, and the employee has a responsibility to comply with that.
Yes, especially if they're not employing the hygiene measures that you would have outlined in the policy and that's recommended in terms of covering your nose, covering your mouth, etc. If the person just walking around and just coughing, of course.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yes.
Someone suppose the employee does not leave.
Well, the employer will do what is in their best interest to protect themselves as well as the other employees. So whatever measures they are in place, I don't know if they would. I don't know. You know.
Well, the employer, as I said, has a responsibility to comply, and their failure to comply amounts to a breach of the contract. As I said, you can make it clear that then they could be subject to disciplinary action in relation to it, but that it is in the interest of all employees that they go home.
Okay, we have another question. We have staff working in a work cluster, a cubicle, more so separated by panels. Does this meet the social distancing criteria for a safe work environment?
I actually think that's a little bit too general. I mean, you have them in cubicles. I don't know the distance. I don't know if they're separated by panels, so you shouldn't necessarily. I can't imagine that the droplets would be traveling that far. Mm-hmm. But that's really more. If they're saying that it's about 3 feet apart or 6 feet apart is safe, and then you look at where they are seated versus where they're seated in relation to each other, it may very well be sufficient. I can't see why it really wouldn't be. But you can make adjustments to that depending on how the cubicle is set up. So you can have it where employees aren't really facing other employees directly in the cubicle arrangement. So you might have an employee that isn't like face to face in that sense. Just how you structure where they actually sit in the cubicle, or how the desk is arranged.
So if the employee is
Tanisha, I just want to jump in for a moment there quickly and add that if you as an employer, you're a bit unsure if your current setup or your current work arrangements are adequate in terms of social distancing and the measures being employed at this time, then I would suggest that you have a risk assessment by a competent health and safety professional. Everyone has their specialties, and there are health and safety specialists. And if you are unsure, then you should ask a specialist to review your work arrangements, your floor plan, to see what measures you can best put in place to mitigate any spread within your work environment.
So if the employee is asked to leave, what would be recommended for them? Sick leave, vacation? What would you suggest?
If they're asked to leave, I think the employer does have the option of, the employer can choose to pay them. Vacation is something that would have to be agreed upon because you have to give 14 days notice. So for that to work, you have to give 14 days notice, and otherwise you'd have to agree to contract out of that requirement, and the employee would have to say, yes, I'll take it as my vacation at this time. The difficulty is that sick leave is something which is normally based on an actual medical assessment. And that's where it's a gray area right now in the law, in terms of whether or not if you require the employee to leave at this point, you actually have to pay them, or if they would have to go and claim sick leave. It may be a situation in which you institute a policy that says, if you are coughing over an extended period of time, and in light of the guidance arising from the government and so on, you may need to contact the relevant authorities so that they can tell you what you need to do. in terms of if they actually need to stay home, if they are fit enough to go to work, if they've been assessed to be fit to work. And once that determination is made, then it would be determined whether or not you actually have to pay them, or whether or not they would have to have the opportunity to seek some type of payment by way of through NAS or something of that nature. It really is a difficult, it's a touchy topic right now, because as I said, I think right now there are differences in the legal profession in terms of whether or not you have to pay an employee in that situation, or whether the employee would have to stay home but not be paid. Because if you're on sick leave, you don't need to be paid. But sick leave is something that's normally determined by a doctor.
We have another question here from our friends on Facebook. If the job is bringing vehicles to be fixed, you don't want that they're exposed. Okay, hold on a minute. If the job bringing vehicles to be fixed, you don't want what they are exposed to be exposed to the employers have a right to force employees to service that vehicle, not knowing the level of exposure the clients was open to.
Okay, the question isn't quite clear to me. Let me see if I can
see if I can rearrange it. Okay, so pretty much what she's asking, if you're working in an environment where you're fixing vehicles and persons are bringing in those vehicles for you to have fixed, but you're not sure what these persons are exposed to, do the employers have a right to force the employee to service that vehicle without knowing the level of exposure that the clients were open to?
I would imagine that, as I said, with every business, there are different ways to ensure health and safety. So in a situation like that, the employer or the business people cannot know, I suppose, what germs, I suppose, were on the vehicles that are coming in. And in that case, the question is whether or not when you actually engage to have that done, you can make arrangements for the vehicle or the parts of it to be sanitized. You can perhaps have your staff use gloves, if not use gloves, the same constant hand washing, encourage employees not to touch their faces while servicing the vehicle. I mean, the truth is that it's not a situation where it spreads just by virtue of someone who was in there potentially having the virus. It doesn't spread like that. It would have to be on the surfaces. And if you touch the surfaces that those people would have touched, you're not going to contract the virus unless you then go ahead and touch your face. So it's not really a matter of the employer forcing the employee to service the vehicle. It's about thinking through the ways in which the employee can safely do so. And that does not seem to be a situation, as far as I'm concerned, where the employee is unsafe, like definitely unsafe. To my mind, there are ways in which that can be safely done. There's much greater risk in terms of working environments where there's direct face-to-face contact, where people are actually speaking to each other at a close distance, than a situation where someone is just servicing a vehicle which may have had someone in it that was exposed to the virus.
Yes, I agree with Kristen, and let me just add here that from a health and safety perspective, this is where the administrative controls and your customer service policies, et cetera, would come into effect here as well, in terms of letting customers know not to bring the vehicles in perhaps very bad conditions or dirty and those type of things. And then for your employees as well to make sure they practice their hygiene measures when they're actually cleaning the vehicles, etc., in order to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's all about thinking practically.
Yeah,
that's the truth. It's all about thinking practically.
What about mandatory self-quarantine? Would the employer be required to pay the employee?
So mandatory self-quarantine, meaning by the government requiring that employees quarantine themselves?
Yes.
Okay. The truth is that from a strictly legal perspective, I cannot see how an employer would be responsible for paying an employee in that situation. It is unfortunate, but what it means is that by virtue of an external factor, the employee is unable to perform their job function. They're not actually sick, but the authorities have recommended that people self-quarantine. In a situation like that, it is not the employer compelling the employee to stay home. It is not a situation that has otherwise been provided for in law. So therefore, you have to apply basic principles. As I said, a contract is an agreement for an employee to perform a service for a person, as in for business, in exchange for payment. If the employee cannot perform, the employer has no obligation to pay. So in that situation, I cannot see how an employer would be compelled to pay. That's why I actually think it's necessary at this point for there to be some steps taken in terms of the provisions that the law makes to protect employees, not to compel employers to pay, but perhaps to expand the range of circumstances in which an employee can be paid to perform. It may be that in order to protect an employee, you might want to look at whether or not your business is the type that would qualify for layoff. And if you did that, then maybe the employee would have the benefit of getting an NS benefit during that time. But that would have to, as I said, be an agreement, and it would also have to be something where the business is one which could reasonably make the argument that the services were not necessarily required at that point in time. There was a reduction in business or something of that nature.
We have a comment here. Under the Health and Safety, an employee can refuse work if they feel it is a risk to their health and safety. Do we agree?
Their condition.
I'm sorry, that the employee can
under the Health and Safety Act, an employee can refuse work if they feel it is a risk to their health and safety.
If they feel it is, okay. Any entitlement to refuse work would have to be reasonable. And I would have to look at the specific section that the person is speaking to in relation to that. Because, sorry, but I'd have to look at the specific section in relation to that, because you can't just get up and say, I don't feel like if it's safe to go to work.
Exactly.
It's not as simple as that. As long as the employer has done the things that are reasonably necessary to secure the safety of the employee, and the things that are reasonably practicable to do so. For example, you can't have an employer that takes every single possible step that's recommended publicly to secure people's safety. They ensure that there is social distancing. They ensure that adequate equipment is provided, whether that's in the form of sanitizer or even in the form of gloves, depending on the nature of the business. They have limited contact as much as possible with external people, with customers and so on. In a situation like that, if the employee just feels as if they cannot work, like if they're not safe, that does not justify that. And that does not justify them to be paid. It certainly would not justify that. Whatever happens has to be based on reasonableness. You can't just refuse.
If there is a national shutdown and the employer is not liable, would NIS pay, or is it just a misfortune?
Okay, well, that's one of those other questions.
Kristen,
Yes,
let me jump in here. Sorry to cut you off.
Sorry, go on.
But that the procedures under a national shutdown are actively being discussed by the social partnership.
Okay.
So given that, I wouldn't want us to preempt that discussion. It is something that we're engaging on. So if we get to that point, then the decisions coming out of the social partnership will be communicated on how the country would address that situation.
Yes. Right. because there definitely need to be additional provisions in terms of how that applies, because at this point it's really a matter of squeezing it into what already exists that never contemplated this happening. So it really, I'm looking forward to seeing exactly how they're proposing to address that, because you have to look at employers. You can't require employers to pay. Employers are not responsible for that if there's national shutdown, but employees can't just not earn as well. So I'm happy to hear that there's discussion on that point.
If I work in an organization and one of my employees has a family member who came in from one of the high-risk countries, can I, as the employer, ask that employee not to come to work?
Pardon me? Sorry, can you read the question again?
If I work in an organization where one of my employers have a family member who came in from a high-risk country, can I, as the employer, ask that employee not to come to work?
Okay, so they have an employee. Okay, so they themselves have not gone abroad, but they have been exposed to a person who was overseas. I don't know that you could reasonably require that employee not to come to work, because there's just simply too much speculation, right? There's just simply too much speculation there about the extent to which there was exposure, especially in the context now of people being required to self-quarantine and so on once they come in from overseas. And that was in place since last week. Well, Sunday was the official time, but I understand people started doing that from last week. So I don't know that an employer in that situation could reasonably require the employee not to come to work. But what the employer could do is, for that week, they could try to arrange how the employee works in a way to make it less likely that they interact with other members of staff as well as customers. That may be a practical way of approaching it, but I can't see in law how they would be entitled to say just don't come, without paying them, of course. I'm sure the employee would say, well, if you're prepared to pay me to stay home, that's okay.
I think this one is our last question. If I work in an organization that is relatively small and now we're practicing social distancing, and given the structure of the organization, there's really no space for us to socially distance. And because the nature of the job is not one that we can all be working remotely, what can an employer do in this case?
Okay, so they can't all work remotely. One of the things which I think people have tried is to have employees stagger coming into the office, where some work remotely, some work in the office. In other instances, they've tried to stagger hours, so where they change the hours a bit. Of course, it's something that would have to be subject to mutual agreement, but they try to change the hours to ensure that the employees aren't necessarily working so closely together or working in the exact same hours. You can look at how you adjust the job functions and so on, the way that they do their jobs, in order to ensure that there's limited interaction in that sense. And then, as I said, then implement policies in relation to hand washing, sanitizing, encouraging employees not necessarily to be, let's say, facing each other, or even, let's say, talking as much in the working environment. And maybe that's something that has to be done. If it's a small space and you can erect some type of barriers as between the employees, even though the distance itself might not be the greatest one that you might want, or the ideal one, you might be able to, erect certain barriers to limit the extent to which there are droplets that go into each other's spaces. As I said, without having more details, it's difficult to give something specific, but what I could say is that there are things that the employer can think about to make it easier to ensure the safety of the employees.
Okay, I think that was the last question for today. Are there any last questions that anyone would like to ask before we wrap up? Okay, so we have one more question here. I'm not sure if this is something similar that was answered, but if one of the branches of a company is shut down and the other branches are open, will the persons from the closed branch be paid, especially since there is no current mandate to shut down the island?
It would depend very much on the reason for the shutdown. I mean, if you shut down a branch, not because of general concerns about health and safety, but if you shut down a branch because of a reduced business or the reduced amount of business that you're getting because of the COVID-19, then the employer wouldn't have a responsibility to pay the employee in that situation. It would just fall to be one of those things where you are either making people redundant or you're laying them off. That's how it would be treated. I can't see why there would be a responsibility to pay those employees from the other branches unless there is work that can be provided to them to do at the branch that is open. If there isn't that work, then they would have to be, as I said, either made redundant or laid off.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kristen and Nicole, for joining us today. Thank you for sharing and imparting your knowledge on us. And thank you to all of those participants who came out and joined with us and answered some questions. And we all got to learn from each other today. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys joining us tomorrow as we go a bit deeper into finalizing our discussion, where we are going to be looking at business as usual, but with a twist. And we're going to be talking about shifting mindsets to embrace flexibility, providing quality service in a rapid shifting environment, identifying strengths, and redeploying resources. And on our final webinar, we'll be looking at to lay off or not to lay off. That's the question. Budgeting in uncertainty, negotiating with lenders and vendors, and layoff as a last resort.